Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first April webinar of Students for Liberty Spring Webinar Series. My name is Jose Nino, and I'm a member of the SFL Executive Board. I will be running the last half of the SFL webinar series. We are honored to have Cody Wilson of Defense Distributed deliver a talk tonight on the 3D printing of firearms. Before we begin, I'd like to take a moment to introduce Students for Liberty and several of our new programs. Students for Liberty is a 501c3 nonprofit organization run by students and for students, dedicated to spreading the ideas of liberty. We were formed about 5 years ago to serve a previously untapped niche in our universities, connecting liberty-friendly students with other students, faculty, organizations, and resources to help them advance their ideas and applications of classical liberalism. Some of the resources we offer include free books for student groups, handbooks on running a student organization, tabling kits, leadership training, and our bread and butter, conferences. The most recent resources that student leaders in our network can now take advantage of are our drug policy resource kits that consist of materials from Students for Sensible Drug Policy, the Marijuana Policy Project, and SFL itself. Materials include stickers, Know Your Rights and Education, Not Incarceration handouts, marijuana legalization brochures, and No Victim, No Crime tabling banners. The first 50 kit requests received will be fulfilled at no cost to student groups. After the first 50 requests are received, students will need to cover $10 for the shipping cost for the resource fulfillment. All of this can be ordered on our website, studentsforliberty.org. Lastly, if you want to be part of the premier program for community organizing for liberty on your college campus, please check out our campus coordinator program. This highly competitive program looks for strong student leaders who are willing to take on certain responsibilities such as organizing SFL regional conferences, creating and hosting leadership forums, distributing SFL resources on campus, assisting local leaders with their groups, and helping individuals with their own groups on campus. If you think you have what it takes to be part of this program, please check out the campus coordinator application page on our website. All applications close on May 3rd, so make sure to get your applications finished in a timely manner. Now I am pleased to introduce our speaker this evening. Cody R. Wilson is a student at the University of Texas School of Law. He is the crypto anarchist founder and director of Defense Distributed and DefCAD, nonprofit organizations that develop and publish open source gun designs suitable for 3D printing. Wilson was called the face of printable firearms by Make Magazine and was named one of the 15 most dangerous people in the world by Wired. Just a quick note before we get things started. There will be about 15 minutes of Q&A at the end of the webinar. Feel free to type any questions or inquiries into the question box. For those interested, this webinar will be recorded and archived on our website in the next few weeks. We will be sending you more detailed information about internships and other opportunities in the Liberty Movement in our follow-up email. And without further ado, I present to you Cody.
Hey, all right, thank you, man. I appreciate it. Guys, I'm already seeing questions in the question box here, but they're so tiny I can barely read them the way the window works. So I'll try to figure that out during the speech. And I think also the Q&A session, or the Q&A component of the speech might be the most essential or maybe the most valuable. So I'll try not to bore you with this presentation, but there's this prevailing narrative about who and what we are that you get in the media every day, and I'd at least like to tell you about the organization myself. So if you'll indulge me, let me tell you something about the philosophy and practices of a group called Defense Distributed, which only until a few months ago was nothing other than the dream of just a couple people online who haunted 4chan. And somehow now is affiliated with the student liberty movement, right? Perhaps the movement generally. I was just invited to Pork Fest. I don't know if I'm going to go speak there or not. And in fact, I keep I keep daydreaming that there'll be a terminus to this project. I'm not going to be part of the, one of the Sarah Palin's touring on buses telling about printable guns all the time. I'd like for this thing to have an end, and in a sense be more of a memory, but or at least like an inspiration for other similar projects or copycats. I don't want to occupy this space forever in the way that I'm doing. Okay, anyway, so thank you for that. This is the logo of Defense Distributed. It was inspired by the Bulgarian tool marks on AK-74 magazines. I just think it's a very attractive logo, and there's something kind of ancient, maybe even atavistic about it. No big deal. So a big question I ask people is, what does 3D printing mean? I hope you guys can all hear me. I assume you can. I'm seeing the audio levels. A lot of the criticism of this project, and perhaps its personality, it's been seen to be aggressive, it's been seen to be abrasive, and perhaps it has as its targets leading prominent politicians. We named the magazine after Cuomo, Governor Cuomo in New York, for example. We named our AK47 magazine after Dianne Feinstein. And so many people think that we've chosen as our nemesis the politicians in Washington. But really my attitude about it is one of contempt rather than confrontation. So I think that's been a bit of a mistake. I think that the people on the Hill are really only people we pay attention to because we have to pay taxes. But I think they're a full standard deviation in IQ below us, by and large, and we shouldn't really have to worry about what they do. And so my criticisms, actually, especially these days, are more engineered at. Look at this lawn gnome. They're more engineered at the guy who talks about lawn gnomes. His name is Bree Pettis, and yes, he's basically the leader of the direct-to-consumer or the retail end of the 3D printing industry. He's a guy that's responsible for getting 3D printers into the hands of many people, almost like a Bill Gates of home 3D printing. And even though he's an ally, and I've heard somewhat sympathetic towards our project, I think it's his attitude that in the end is more destructive than these politicians, these series of tubes politicians who don't stand a chance of understanding what we're doing and why. Bree Pettis gave a speech at South by Southwest where he said, and I promise this lawn gnome is relevant, he said, imagine he revealed this project and this product that's, he calls it a digitizer. It's a scanner. And a big part of 3D printing now in 2013 is being able to digitize objects, put them into CAD to be able to print them out on printers. And when MakerBot revealed this digitizer, Bree said, imagine what we can do with this. We can fill the world with lawn gnomes. And I thought, wow, how anti-revolutionary in the extreme. In fact, everyone wants to talk about how 3D printing might lead to an industrial revolution, or the new maker revolution, or political or medical revolution. It's the hot word to use, and they don't mean it in the 1848 sense. They simply mean it as a form of advertising, I think, because once their projects or their products or their machines begin to be or suggest that they might become revolutionary, they run as far away from that possibility as possible. And I hold as a great example of that the firearm. Once 3D printers started to make firearm components, well, there's something incredibly attractive about it, and the media picks up on it, but at the same time, now everyone who was before proclaiming, yes, this will change everything, means, well, we didn't mean this. And I hold that to be in such bad faith.
Hey, Cody.
Yeah.
Cody, not to cut you off or anything, but could you speak a little bit louder into your mic, because we're getting some complaints about your presentation not being too audible.
Oh, damn. Okay. Well, my mic is as loud as it can possibly be. Is this level fine? I can go get a backup mic if that's necessary.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, just get the backup.
Yeah, I'll come right back. New microphone. I don't know if you guys can hear it, though. How's that sound? You guys hear me?
Sounds good, Cody.
How's that? Is that working for
That
you?
sounds good.
Yeah? Okay.
All right, guys. Thanks for
Here, I gotta find a place to put this. I'm in my apartment right now, sitting on top of a metal detector box. It's a kind of a mess. Hold on. Okay, I'm gonna check one more time on the audio. Are you guys okay with this? Jose, how is it?
Good.
Okay, great. All right. Getting back. All right, so 3D printers begin to print. What you're seeing here is the first partially printed rifle. 3D printers begin to print low receivers of AR-15s. This was done famously by an amateur gunsmith named Michael Guslick. Basically, once he did this, he unassumingly put it on the AR-15 forums and said, oh, look what I've done. And it got some press. It got a lot of press, in fact. And what was interesting to me, and almost maybe a little fearful, is that we had just put our YouTube video up at the end of July. Pretty much the same time he reached the peak of his press. And I thought, oh, wow, well, he more or less did it first. Even though our idea was to make a completely printed gun if it was possible. I mean, we thought that was more ambitious. But the storm began from the beginning. So the maker community was divided. And we can talk about their politics and how maybe they're apolitical or skew left. But basically, the maker world doesn't have a strong set of politics or guiding beliefs. It's not as hacker-oriented. It's just kind of a tinkerer world where its icons are happy to proclaim radicalness and openness and freedom, but these are really buzzwords. Once you print something like an AK47 magazine, people begin to run for cover, and not for obvious reasons. This, by the way, is I think the first generation Feinstein mag that we got to work. This is a magazine for an AK-47 rifle. It's a Sega, I think. This is taken at Liberty Hill in Texas. So Defense Distributed begins where Michael Guslick began, and accidentally, we decided we wanted to become a project, and this is while we were still in Little Rock, Arkansas. We met at a series of meetings that we imagined to be somewhat important. Maybe this is because we're egoistic, maybe it's not, but we met at this hotel and decided, all right, we want to be an organization. We don't necessarily want to be a corporation, but we want to get together because we didn't have the money or the resources ourselves. We wanted to get together, pool the resources to see, can 3D printers, these supposedly new revolutionary devices, can they make something revolutionary? Can you make a gun on a 3D printer? It seems to be a very impractical question, and even the product itself would seem to be very impractical, but can it be done? Can it become a true statement of the world? And would that be significant? These are big questions, and they depend upon a lot of ifs, but over a series of meetings at the Peabody Hotel in Little Rock, Arkansas, my team and myself, my initial team in Little Rock, set about how we were going to do this. And this began with a really cheaply made YouTube video and an Indiegogo crowdfunding campaign. Now, the video was an accident. I was frustrated with my friend Chris, who basically his production company they weren't clutch. They couldn't make it happen, and so I was left to do this myself. I so wanted to communicate the ideas and the reasons and the methods and just why we were doing this. I couldn't wait any longer. I wanted to get this done before August. So I just filmed this video in a closet of a friend of mine who worked at a network data service center. And I basically, over 8 grueling minutes, I know it's too long, explained the philosophies, or at least the driving goals of Defense Distributed. We were a group of people online, and we thought, look, if you give us some money in good faith, we're going to prototype on 3D printers to see if you can actually print a gun. We had done quite a bit of research in the summer of 2012, and we knew that this was going to involve a ton of legal hurdles. But we were ready and willing to do that. And in fact, in August, I had already communicated with leading scholars and lawyers at the Institute for Justice, and I'd already talked to prominent lawyers and NFA lawyers across the country, and we were ready and willing to do this the way we wanted to do it. We asked for $20,000 in this video. The domain was originally printablegun.com, but we always called ourselves Defense Distributed. Very quickly, we organized a little bit better, but from the very beginning, this has been a fly by the seat of your pants, bootstrap kind of project. So it's slowly gotten into shape, but that's just a consequence of doing it for as long as we've done it. We raised the money, like I said, on a site called Indiegogo because I thought it was less paternalistic than Kickstarter.com. Crowdfunding is its own thing now. There's so many different ways to crowdfund, so many different crowdfunding sites, but Indiegogo is known for just allowing you to throw a project up and only really taking you to task if there are flags or problems on the back end. And I thought, well, we might be able to get away with this. Yes, they had a terms of service that said you couldn't
have a project related to the sale or distribution of firearms, but I thought, well, being a law student, my read of that was that we weren't giving people firearms, we were giving people digital files. This was the idea. If you give us a donation, we'll create this gun, we'll prototype this gun, but we won't give you the gun in exchange. We'll simply put the files out there for free online. And I thought, look, in a very literal sense, this is not violating the terms of service. Of course, that's wishful thinking. And so Indiegogo did, after 22 days, remove the project from its website. After a lot of media inquiries, it never made a statement. I think to this day it's never made a statement about why it did what it did, but it explained to me that it was a simple terms of service violation. My appeal was more or less ignored, but I understand that. They're a private group. They can do what they want to do. Fortunately, Forbes Online ran a piece about what we were doing the day after Indiegogo pulled us down, and I had just enough, I guess, foresight to start accepting Bitcoin donations in PayPal on our main website, and we raised the money. So after we raised the money, and this was, I suppose this was a big victory. I was not keen to give up or anything, but I thought, well, this was a massive hurdle. It would be very difficult to crowdfund this again and get this attention the same way. So raising the money was the big thing. We raised $20,000. The first thing I did, instead of buy a Mojo brand printer, an FDM printer from Stratasys, I contacted a Stratasys sales rep. This is the logo for Stratasys Incorporated, by the way, a big player in the 3D printing world right now, especially in America. I contacted a sales rep from Stratasys and said, look, I want to lease something. I don't know that it'll work. I don't want to buy it. And they said, well, that's great. We've actually got to try before you buy. You print SE Plus program. It's a $30,000 printer, but you can lease it for 3 months for $3,000. I thought, wow, that's great. And we'll get to find out maybe by the end of that month 3 if this actually works, because I'm always ambitious. I'm always trying to think, oh, sure, the paperwork will happen in 4 or 5 weeks, no big deal. I should be more conservative in my estimations for how long these things take. But I thought, okay, yeah, somewhere in that period, we'd get to start prototyping pieces and perhaps even printed guns by the end of it. So I leased the printer from Stratasys. The problem was Stratasys found out about what we were doing through the press, I think principally through Forbes, and the sales rep got back with me and started the logistics company, and it was just clear from almost the day that I had received the printer that it was going to be taken back from me. So I never unboxed it, and sure enough, in a couple of days, by the end of September, Stratasys demanded the return of the printer and was more or less threatening legal action if I didn't give in. I gave them the printer back. This caught the attention of Wired and the New York Times because it's the first brouhaha over 3D printing, a company literally taking back its printer because of what you could do with it. Maybe it was the first trembling of doing something really scary with a 3D printer. And maybe a foreshadowing of the actual battle to be had in the future between the industry elites, the collusive members of established industry, and the makers, even if I don't number myself among the makers. So Stratasys took back its printer. The second problem, though, is that Stratasys criminally referred me to the ATF. It wasn't enough to not do business with me, to not want my custom. They criminally referred me to the ATF, saying, hey, you should check this guy out. He's obviously doing illegal things. And it's no small thing. If you guys are familiar with the ATF, to be criminally referred to them is rolling the dice. A criminal firearms conviction is a life ender. We know how felonies work in the United States. So you become a permanent second-class citizen. I was nothing but public with my intentions to do what I wanted to do with this printer. I was honest. I was saying I would never break the law, and still Stratasys decided to play, in my mind, just a bit dirty. And I was investigated by the ATF. Our conversations were pleasant. Our conversations were, I think, had, and very quickly we understood that where each other was, and that I was clearly not trying to, like, oh, I don't know, do anything grossly illegal. And so what was a pretty scary situation on one day, beginning on one day, ended all right by the end of the day. And since I think I've had an all right relationship with the ATF, although I recognize what that must sound like. But this project, in a sense, got off to a very rocky start. Moving on, though, if I can just segue so hard, we still had $20,000 and we still wanted access to a 3D printer. So I thought, okay, no one's going to lease me one. I simply reached out to people in the community, and other people reached out from Austin to me. We're based out of Austin, Texas. And they said, well, you know, you can purchase time on our printers, and we'll let you print whatever you want. Just don't put our name out there, and you know what, I kind of like what you're doing. You're rocking the boat. And so we got enough people who had 3D printers in Austin who were basically willing to let me operate, to let a couple of my guys operate. And this is the very first article we printed. I'm still so proud of it, even though It has an interesting reputation, but this was Guslix, micro Guslix, printed reinforced lower receiver from a website called Thingiverse.com. The very first thing we wanted to do was replicate what he had done some months ago in 2012, and we thought, well, we'll print what he did. He did it in ABS FDM. We'll do it in object photopolymer because we thought, well, it's an interesting material. It's the highest end machine. Perhaps we'll get a different result. Who knows? And instead of building it into a handgun, a 22, we'll build it into a rifle. Now, we won't build it into a full AR, but we'll do a 5.7 by 28 FN, I think is what we built on it. So it was a mid-range rifle round, and we built a rifle with it. And the result of that test was on YouTube, and the rifle broke. This is just the piece to the left is printed, the piece to the right is a commercial polymer lower. There are some substantial differences, but they seem similar. The one to the right is stronger. But this green piece famously broke on YouTube and after 6 rounds, and of course I think the liberal commentariat and the literati was happy to proclaim, well, okay, phew, problem avoided, printable guns don't work very well. But this wasn't the goal to say, oh, we have a printed gun. The goal was to simply begin. And we wanted to begin with Michael Gussick's file. What we did next, by the way, this is kind of the breakdown after we broke the rifle from the video that you can watch. I believe the video is called Thingiverse Printed AR-15 Receiver on YouTube. You can go to Defense Distributors' YouTube page and see all the videos that we have up. But basically, the critical thicknesses weren't there in the back of the piece. The piece is made and shaped like it would be made out of aluminum. But instead, we used a photopolymer that was about 5% less strong than ABS. The thicknesses just weren't there in the buffer tower. So after just a little bit of flex, the stress risers at the end of these threads that you might be able to see just allowed for a complete tear through from the recoil. But in about a month, and our first receiver was tested in December 1st, I believe, or we put the video up December 1st. By the end of December, we had done a lot of receivers. The press more or less had moved on and was interested in other things, but again, despite what you may know or have heard about me, my goal isn't to just attract press. My goal is to do what we set about to do. So we had done many, many receivers in a short amount of time. Let me take care of something here. Okay. So what you see are basically representations of all of the major technologies in 3D printing. The clear receiver is object photopolymer, VeraClear. The ones with striations are FDM printed receivers on U-prints and dimension printers. And the ones in the background are SLA resin and another object piece. So we did about everything that you could do with these same pieces. But you might notice tiny variations in some of them. We were reinforcing them all through December and the beginning of January. We got to where one would break at 6 for the first one I showed you, but by the end of December they were breaking at 50, sometimes 80, sometimes 100. And not that that's a difficult feat. The only question is, how thick do you need to make the thicknesses? Where do you put in curves instead of corners? This was actually pretty simple work. It's just we were doing it part-time. And so maybe it feeds some narrative from someone wanting to say that, well, it's the progress of technology. No, it's just trial and error and putting curves in places. We wanted to get our own version of a receiver out and online, but we wanted it to be a good one that across technologies would work because, I mean, you want to stand by your work. Moving on. So our failure point moved across the piece all through December and into the beginning of January to where by generation 3, the most consistent failure we would get was through the rear takedown pins in the back of the receiver. This is actually different from the first failure point in the receiver that broke at 6 rounds. And not that it's that important, but just tiny details that are overlooked. Basically, the cross-sectional surface area around those pins was so small that really no matter what you did around it, you would get a break there. So we had to really think about and fill in spaces underneath the upper and around that back pin. It took a few weeks of work to really figure that out. Now, the result of that work wasn't revealed until February for other reasons, since I visited Europe and did some other things. But we eventually got these receivers, the next generation of these receivers, to basically fire indefinitely, 600 rounds. What we think on paper is at least 1,000 rounds. It's just simply about making the piece reflect the material that it's been built with. And maybe this isn't new news. commercial polymer lowers are available in commerce. You can make AR receivers anywhere and from any material, but now you can print them too, and they work, and perhaps that's the story. But again, this isn't even beginning with the initial idea of defense distributed, which is one of a completely printable gun. For another reason, the fact that the AR-15 low receiver is still considered a gun in commerce or by regulation, people think, oh, well, you've made a gun, quote unquote, neat trick. We're not about riding on that confusion. I don't call this a gun that we've printed. I call it a receiver. But the press, especially the international press, thinks that, well, they're playing a neat trick by saying this is a gun, when of course it's not. Look at all the stuff on the upper, and that's actually required to make the thing work. This is simply a result of confusion. These are just displacement and stress diagrams of our receivers that we did, especially through December and January. A lot of things you do, you don't just make a change and print it out. It's expensive, so you test what you do in, this is a software plugin called SolidWorks Simulation. You actually do a lot of testing with some real-world assumptions in software before you ever have to prototype. Yeah, stress. So this is, I believe this is Gus. No, this is a Gen 3, but still, you can see where the red risers are. This is where, like our green receiver, our very first receiver was tempted to fail, and it makes sense why when you look at the diagram. You don't even have to study the numbers necessarily. So a lot of interesting things began to happen after December. Now, this whole time I'm waiting on 501c3 approval as a nonprofit, and I also applied at the end of October of 2012 to be a federally licensed arms manufacturer because of people like this. This is Representative Steve Israel of New York, Democrat, holding up a picture of Michael Guslick's partially printed pistol, and of course no attribution to Michael Guslick. If anything, attribution to us. You can also see the security theater in the background. This is classic scare tactics. Ladies and gentlemen, they're going to be able to print guns. We need a lot to protect you. And I'm not really sure how serious to take this man to this day. But this guy begins to ride more or less in our wake and perhaps on our coattails and give himself a profile based off of our work. I get it, but at the same time, he's not committed to learning the technology or to really learning what we're doing. And so he began to confuse the primary goal of our project with something else entirely. And so let me give it to you. And I hope we're not completely out of time. Man, I really want to say more than this, but Mr. Israel has made it a point to make a demonstration or talk about the need for a piece of law in Title 18 called the Undetectable Firearms Act. If a law or if a gun can go through an airport metal detector or isn't as detectable as a firearm laid out in this law, it's considered undetectable for purposes of that law and is dangerous and is a terrorist weapon, and therefore we should ban it. It's simply an accident of the process that we're using that these guns would be undetectable by that law. It isn't our goal to make undetectable firearms in that sense. We're not trying to subvert that law. We're trying to subvert a much grander strategy of observation, detection, documentary individuation in general. And this message has been completely stepped on by this man. And I resent him in a way, but at the same time, I know he's not doing it, so it's like almost not his fault. But if I could just say it, the goal isn't to make undetectable firearms in the local sense, but unobservable firearms in the grander sense, that you can make your own firearm. And the ATF and the Arms Trade Treaty and the UN, they have nothing to say about it because it doesn't enter their observation through documentary processes. There isn't the serial number. There isn't the stamp in the software that goes back to the database. You make it for yourself. It's unobserved in the greater sense. But this has been conflated with this need to, oh, defense distributed is about making undetectable pistols. Look, this might be true in a sense that it's literally true and these would be undetectable, but that's not the goal, if I could give that to you. Students of liberty. This is a quote from Mr. Steve Israel, which I think is interesting only in a Freudian sense, because I don't think he knows what he's doing, but here it is. Law enforcement officials should have the power to stop homemade high-capacity magazines from proliferating with a Google search. Now, he says high-capacity magazines because in January we also began having success making magazines. After Sandy Hook, I realized, oh, okay, great. Magazines themselves are going to be political footballs. That should be pretty easy to do on 3D printers. And so we perfected an AR magazine over the course of January and into February. It did really well. And Israel again sought some press on saying, well, I'm going to add magazines to the Undetectable Firearms Act. But look at his quote. Law enforcement, or power generally, should have the power to stop these magazines from proliferating with a Google search. I mean, to read it literally means to give power itself the ability to wedge itself between you and your online freedoms of indexing and searching on Google. I mean, I don't think it's an accidental statement. He is complicit with a program of power that would take for itself or deal to itself such a card, even if he denies otherwise. I don't think there are accidental statements. Moving on to what I think is more important, though, Steve Israel has more or less faded, just like any of the anti-gunners have, because their protests and their problems with the same. Well, we don't think you should have guns. Okay, well, this is no longer a relevant contribution to this debate anymore, because the only question is how many different ways can we make a gun going forward. There's a website called Thingiverse run by Bree Pettis and MakerBot Industries. It's not Bree Pettis personally, but this was and is one of the biggest CAD repositories for 3D printing on the internet, and a big website, well trafficked, and has a big community, a vibrant community. And that community hosted a lot of gun files, but after Thingiverse, it took the gun files down. And I guess the reason I was incensed in the beginning, and even to this day, is that it's not illegal to make a gun in the United States of America, especially a Title I weapon. It's not illegal. Those components themselves aren't illegal to have to make it possess. And of course, drug paraphernalia is. Not that that's a problem, but MakerBot and Thingiverse keep the drug paraphernalia up, but take the gun files down. I think it's part of this grander complicity and collusion with industry, and these people think that they're political. It's not just good taste. It's not just San Francisco, Sandy Hook promise, we're not going to help proliferate guns. It's trying to make noblesse oblige decisions about who should have what and what is more or less in good taste to allow you to have. This is scary when the brokers of open source, quote unquote, themselves say that, well, it's probably better that you not have this. And it still sticks with me. I haven't been able to tease it all out. Perhaps I should write it down. But it was from the moment in the end of December that Thingiverse took the gun files down that I went on. I basically took the project to another level. We created a site called defcad.org. This site hosted gun files. To this day, hosts gun files, and despite our April Fool's joke yesterday, will continue to host gun files. It wasn't taken down by the government. When you have an opportunity to paint the world, you should. But so we, to the best of my knowledge, are the biggest repository of 3D printing related gun files on the internet. Not that that's a huge niche, but the forums have over 1,000 registered users, and the traffic is high. I mean, the ad revenue alone pays for the expenses of DefCAD and Defense Distributed, which is good because the project has a big materials budget. So just on hosting these files for ourselves, we're able to basically pay the main expenses of the project. You guys are going to have to keep me up on time here. I'm just talking, but I really want to get to, okay, we did magazines in January. We did lots of magazines. Magazines are basically a doable thing, and to the point where I had the comfort of going before the media and the people and saying, look, you can't have this anymore in any meaningful sense. Even if you couldn't already have it before, this is a way to prove that point with a fresh technology and to fresh eyes and say, look, it's outside of your control. And that's what we've set about doing. Is it more about creating the reality, or is it more about creating the impression or the hyper-reality of what we want? And I don't really know how to answer that question. I know that we want to take everything for ourselves. We want to say that, no, it's all off the table. No program or political program can have for itself the things that it wanted or had for itself in 1994. And I think we've done a good job at putting at least that message out there. There's a documentary from Vice Magazine that you can watch about the project, what it was doing in January at that time. And that was definitely my message then. But now we've moved on to other things. And I think, by the way, what you see here is as printable as the AR-15 ever gets. And by the way, these pieces are done in FDM, fused deposition modeling, which is the more accessible form of 3D printing. We have been criticized in the past for giving the appearance of only doing high-end 3D printing. That's simply not the case. These days, we mostly run on Uprints and Dimension printers, cheaper FDM. I mean, yes, commercial, but the lowest-end commercial machines you can get. By the way, here's just a picture of an FDM printed lower. This is basically the cheapest way of doing this. This is still doing it with support material, so it's still a cut above, but people from all over the world print these receivers on MakerBots. I don't think, though, that this is the takeaway of our project, that we're doing receivers, that we're doing magazines. These are ways of explaining why and how and just what are the motivations of this organization, Defense Distributed. In March, I was granted a license to manufacture firearms by the government. And, you know, perhaps this was naive to think, well, they'll let me do it. But I did want to do it in America. I did want them to tell me why they wouldn't let me, and so far they haven't. It's just taken a long time. But we're now in a position where we weren't when we started this receiver magazine project. Those are articles that anyone can make, and now we think we can make printable firearms, and we think we can make complete ones. This seems almost undoable to many people, but there's different kinds of plastics like these. For example, this is a series of nylon 6, I think. Very machinable, very tough, better at resisting impact strengths, and has better tensile strength overall, if I believe. But I even think we can do it in the plastics that are already available for 3D printing. Maybe not PLA, but we've done some things in ABS that do work. And so yes, I've started a project right now called Defconcom. Defconcom is basically defcad.org 2.0. The idea is that you should be able to search for things. You don't just have to browse in this kind of unwieldy browsing section that we have of files. And we don't just have to do firearms. We're open to doing anything, but we're open to do it open source, and we're, I think, even willing to confront the copyright dragon in good time. I'm not saying a couple years from now or anything. I'm saying we want to try to push the line on copyright as well. If 3D printing can be revolutionary, we want to see if it can. And so we're willing to put a tool out there where other people, I think, perhaps weren't. Other people are willing to let copyright and laws and mores dictate what will be available to you. But we see a world where not only can you find components, but you can fund other people's components or fund other people's projects. So there'll be people like Defense Distributed acting, soliciting their files and wares. And there'll be ways of, once you find a file, seeing where you can get it, you can either download the file yourself, develop it through a model that we have, upload your own, print it from other services where we create micro markets, or even buy it from traditional vendors. So I'm seeing the possibilities and wanting to facilitate the possibilities of 3D printing as well, in a way that I guess people just aren't willing to be as ambitious with it as I'd like. And not that I think I'm some scion who can step in and say, well, this is what 3D printing means, but I'm so interested for it to mean something that I'm willing to find out if it can. And I guess I'll leave you with a couple of images before we start Q&A. I'm sure we've probably run over time, but what you see here is something I've never shown anyone. And this is kind of my thank you for listening to me. Those 2 rounds that you see, the kind of exploded 380 rounds, were fired through a plastic barrel that I don't want to show you. But I'm confident that 3D printed guns will work. And in fact, they won't just fire once, but I've seen them, especially these printed barrels, fire multiple rounds. We're on the precipice of something, and maybe it won't be world historic, I don't know. But I think it will be true very soon that 3D printed guns exist and will work. And in fact, will be available to anyone with a 3D printer, and that just excites me. I think as a symbol of something, as a message, and I hope maybe as a grand metaphor for liberty. But some takeaways, just 4 things. This project isn't just about shaking your fist and running around and evading legislation and showing loopholes, although that's fun and it's good to have that reputation. But this project actually went, I think, from, especially if you consider its grounding in the Sandy Hook narrative, we weren't defensive about our rights. We thought we could go on offense. We thought we could say, no, not only should you not take these things, you can't have them. Look. And that message has proved very potent, and I think broke the NRA versus America paradigm that everyone was trying to shove on us for 2 months, and perhaps still are now. We represent another point in that debate entirely, which is that your power is disappearing faster than you think it is. And in fact, if you want to pass a law like in New York, or if you want to be Dianne Feinstein, fine. We'll associate you with these things forever. And there's nothing you can do about it. Once your terrible history in politics is over, the file that someone's going to be editing will be a version X Feinstein Magazine. That's power. That's defense to offense. And then I think critiques of progressivism and progress are important as well. Progressives are mainly the people we have to confront who tell the story about us in the media and who convey the message to the masses. And these progressives, they have interesting ideological and moral matrices, but if you can get them to accept your premise that a printable gun is part of quote-unquote progress or technology of the future or software, it slipstreams really well because progressives basically worship at the altar of progress and technology and software. And so if you can convince them and say yes and printable guns, they resent you for what you're doing, but they don't disagree with you. They don't say, no, this is impossible. They say, oh, wow, what can we do? Goodness, you've accomplished a massive propaganda task with almost no fight at all. And so for months, from October to the beginning of January, and really through February while I was in Europe, I studied ideology and society more than I studied mechanical engineering and plastic processes. I wanted to create the best means of talking to progressives and getting progressives to carry our water and our project and what our message was to the masses. And you see things, I think you see the product of this like in MSNBC and some other places where you expect the progressive to take the traditional red state conservative moral critique of firearms. Well, this is terrible and this will kill everyone. And instead, you get Rachel Maddow saying, well, you got to give them something. They've got a point. It's amazing. And I can't completely explain it to you, but I can see the seams. And it's the ability to participate and confuse these messages, which we know are operative in the progressive cause, that really propelled defense distributed forward. So if I could say anything, it's study ideology more than you study mechanical engineering. And then I think defense distributed maybe is, I don't want to claim too much for it, but I think it's a really good example of 21st century internet practical anarchy. I'm excited about Bitcoin. I'm excited about all kinds of projects. I like WikiLeaks, and I think I would love one day for defense distributed to be considered on a level comparable to those, and at least in the way that it could teach practical anarchy, which is that there's really nothing standing between you and me sending and emailing guns to each other, even if these are only the representations of guns and gun files. But it's interruptive, and I think it has brought to a number of people who are just tired of politics or perhaps even apolitical, it's brought them back around. There's the standard InfoWars, well, everything is terrible and everything's going to be terrible message, and there's a place for that message. But at the same time, I think it's time for people who are young and excited to get into methods and modes of practical anarchy, projects that teach or even expand the limits of practical anarchy. There's so many ways through the internet, and here's the crypto-anarchism, right? The internet allows so many utopian projects that can be more than that. We don't just have to study theory. We can begin subverting the order that is through the internet and teaching practical anarchy and not calling it that. I don't have to get you to change your politics to get you to accept a Bitcoin from me or to get you to download a printable firearm. This is the beginning of a victory stage, ladies and gentlemen. And then utopia now. So yeah, this comes from GJAC, and I gave this speech with Jose and the Libertarian Longhorns at UT. It's not enough to study utopia. It's not enough to dream of planning your society. Seasteading has it in the right direction, which is that, yeah, let's plan governments and let's actually put it into practice. But I'm just saying, okay, read your von Mises, but begin actually creating the world of your most radical imagination. Because I'm telling you, that's all this is. We're no one special. We're nothing special. Ben Denio and I were able to reach out to people and I think communicate to people our message in a strong enough way to get them to want to help us. But we're nobody, and we just wanted to see if we could print a gun. It's still a question mark, but I intend to do it. And despite the masters of this domain saying, well, it can't be done, it doesn't matter if it can't be done. Utopia now. The only thing that's going to change things is if we begin creating this impossible world right now and in all its tiny little stages. And maybe, again, I've claimed too much for this project in saying that it's part of that, but I just don't think that traditional things are impossible anymore. I don't think that neoliberal democracy is the end of civilization, the final political form. I think there is reason to be optimistic about the future of politics, the future of commerce, the future of human organization, and mutual operation. And I think, if anything, these are worthwhile projects. You don't have to just get an internship at Cato. You should begin something related to commerce or to producing things or to radically changing the world that you live in. And this is the end of my project, the end of my presentation. So thank you very much. I'll be happy to accept questions.
Thank you very much, Cody. There are already a few questions lined up for you, and just to let everyone know, if you have any more questions, just feel free to submit them on our question box. And first question we have is from Pierre. Pierre asks, do you prefer donations via credit card, PayPal, or Bitcoins?
Oh, well, okay. So along the lines of the last thing I said, you know, if we can be practical anarchists, well, let's give each other money in Bitcoin. Let's do that, because using Bitcoin is better than using dollars, maybe for obvious reasons. Also, have you seen how quickly Bitcoin is appreciating right now? I mean, of course I would rather take Bitcoin. So Bitcoin is massively preferred. But of course, we subsist on really small donations, probably smaller than you might think. So happy to take anything.
All right. Next question is from Ian. Ian asks, what is a crypto anarchist?
Yeah, crypto anarchy was expressed by Tim May in the late 1980s. It's basically the virtual implementation of anarchic relationships mediated through technology and the internet specifically, networks. And so if we can't have anarchy here, if we can't have anarchic commerce and black market commerce here, if it's too dangerous, we can do it online and mediated through technological means. That's literally all it means. Crypto is not a reference to like in crypto fascism. It doesn't mean quasi-anarchist. It means like cryptography. You can use strong forms of cryptography and security to basically hide from observation and intermediation what you're doing. So this allows for total black markets, zero knowledge systems, pseudonymous and anonymous forms of commerce and communication. Really, a lot of the things that we already see happening in the internet and have been dealing with for over a decade are part of the crypto anarchic vision. So using the internet to bleed anarchy back into our real world forms of behavior. That's the best way I can explain it.
Okay, next question from John. John asks, can you talk about the materials used in 3D printing, in particular the plastic used in the printing process itself? Is it petroleum-based? And if so, are there any plans for alternative sources for the plastic, such as hemp?
Oh yeah, you know, a lot of people lately have sent me this hemp idea. I have no. Okay, so plastic processes get pretty tricky once you start introducing other things into the matrix. Well, it's crazy. And my background isn't in materials science, but the main materials used in 3D printing right now, commercial and hobby, are ABS, PLA. These are thermosets and thermopolymers, or thermoplastics, sorry. And then there are photopolymers, UV photopolymers, and cured by lasers or just like direct UV light, like in object machines and stereolithographic machines and then sintering machines. So the main materials are different kinds of plastics and polymers. And I mean, of course, some are petroleum-based, they're plastic, but they all react differently. They all have different chemical reactions. Some react to chemicals like acetone. Some can be, even if they're weaker on paper, even if their material sheet suggests that they're not that great, you can do certain things to some of them. You can dope others, and it's just there's really a huge buffet of ways to do things. But the hobby level printers really just rely on ABS and PLA. And there's a series of materials that are just now becoming available for low-end printers, a series of nylon materials that I'm excited about, but we haven't started using, so I can't recommend them yet. I guess it's the best way of answering that. I really encourage anyone to just research 3D printing for a while. You've just got to be around there and doing it to start picking up the differences. I mean, the chemical differences are big, and I'm not the best person to talk about them, but they're subtle, but that lead to big outcomes.
Okay, the following question is asked by Andrew. What is the likelihood of your site being taken down by the feds? What would your plan be after that?
Oh, well, I don't know if this is a reference to April 1st. We had it look like it was taken down, mega upload style. But I don't think it's a high likelihood, although we do study the server logs, and I see that Department of Homeland Security and Department of Justice visit a lot, and often for a long time. That makes you nervous. But I really think what's going on is some studying. We have some inside people, for lack of a better word, who are kind of telling us what's going on, and I don't see an imminent threat of our sites being taken down. And one reason, or one way of showing that sense of security is just by holding U.S. DNS. So we put it on .com and .org, and we don't feel the need to move to Sweden. I did experiment with hosting DefCAD at Bahnhof in Sweden for a while, but I mean, uptime was a problem, so I brought it back to the U.S. I don't see right now that the site will be taken down, although I can see why it might be. I just don't think it's very likely.
Okay. Thomas asks, do you have a YouTube channel where you present this sort of information for defense security?
No, so I don't present theory at defensehistory.com, and you guys might be scoffing at that, like this wasn't theory. Like, so yeah, we didn't really get a lot into it. But no, I actually don't like to analyze and explain what we're doing to people. I like to just do it, and the message is in what we're doing. you can tease it out, or maybe you don't have to. Like, what we're doing is, in fact, maybe the better message. So no, I don't go at length really anywhere to talk about theory. Perhaps sometimes in interviews, I'll definitely speak for people like Jose, for people like Students for Liberty. I'm not keen to do it a lot, though. I really want it to be more impenetrable and kind of less analyzed. In fact, I'm a little bit worried about how overexposed the project is now. I don't want it to be totally teased out yet. I'm happy with it making people uncomfortable and making them search for themselves for why and how and what does this mean.
The next question, Mirand asks, how much does a typical consumer-oriented 3D printer cost if one desires to print guns?
Well, right. So the first way to answer that question is to know what you mean by printing guns. A lot of people print the magazines and the receivers. These are the most printed things that we have at DefCAD. And these can be done on MakerBots. These can be done on Ultimakers. And those are a class of printers that are in the $2,000 to $3,000 range. If we're being honest, you can get kits that are cheaper for a lot of different printers, like the RepRap series of printers, the Mindel-Max printers. I mean, there's a lot of sub $1,000 kits and things, but the hours and work involved, I mean, really anything you get is going to be worth $2,000. That's the lowest end stuff in my mind that can print these components.
Andre asks, are you worried about the fact that printed guns are undetectable to metal detectors?
No, I'm not worried about it in a legal sense, and maybe he's asking, like, are you worried about it in like a social sense that now there will be guns that are undetectable by metal detectors? So I'll just answer both ways. In a legal sense, I think we've got it covered. We've had it covered since August. The goal is to become a manufacturer. Manufacturers are exempt from the Undetectable Firearms Act and its prescriptions because Congress doesn't want to, quote unquote, like, what was the quote? It was something like Congress doesn't want to interfere with the development of new technology. Well, thanks, Congress. So I don't think it's a problem on that end. When it comes down to, am I worried that firearms might pass through metal detectors undetected? Look, I'm trying to be realistic here. I think that such firearms have already existed and have existed for a long time. So now they're more open source, freely available. Well, good. There's something about equality there.
The next question is from William, who asks, would black powder weapons be more realistic to focus on? Can you make a modern bullet in your own home?
Yes, and okay. Well, to actually answer the question, I don't know if they're more realistic to focus on now. We really would like to, like I've intimated, we've done some printed barrel stuff. I mean, commercial rounds seem to work actually in printed gun concepts. We just haven't done whole concepts yet for legal reasons, but are about to. So I'm going to withhold judgment on what's more realistic and what's not until I see a few printed guns break and break consistently. It's going to take a while. It's a slow process, but yeah, I think focusing on bullet development in the home, especially with these new programs of legislating or regulating ammunition, it's going to be important. And we studied needle guns, we've studied black powder guns, we've studied it all, man, and willing to go in any direction necessary. Even into like computing, right? So if you could get the basic elemental components of black powder, maybe you could print them. I mean, it's not too far-fetched. So happy to be in this space, happy to study it all, do it all. But I don't know what's realistic and what's not yet. We're happy to mess up and find out.
All right. Next question from Kit. Do you feel more safe in being public and open in everything you're doing? Does being open and public also parallel with the need to open dialogue with the masses?
Yeah, I wonder about the second part about dialogue with the masses. I don't know about that. From the beginning, the goal was just to get the money to do it freely, and we didn't really think about, this is in August, we didn't really think about that we might need to be public for our own safety, or so that we couldn't be shut down in silence and then not risk public outcry. And now I see how essential it is to do something like this and to do it publicly. But it is the slow way of doing it. I got to tell you, it's like telling someone what you're going to do gives them all this opportunity to stop you. And they take it, believe me. So yeah, maybe we're safer for doing it this way, but it's so foolish. I mean, to tell someone what you're going to do before you do it, it's just the slowest way of getting it done. But here I am, you know, I'm walking as a free man right now, you know, knock on wood. But I just don't think, we're in any danger right now. I have heard interesting stories from people who should know that perhaps we're being monitored and surveilled and stuff. But this is what happens when these old people don't understand what you're doing on the Hill. And I'm not apologizing for them. I'm sure it's probably a civil liberty abuse or something, but I feel no constraint on what we're doing right now. It seems that we're free to do it, and probably when we do it, that's when the hammer is dropped. But it's just an accident. But yeah, being public about it has probably helped us out.
We still have a lot of questions lined up, but unfortunately we will not be able to get to address all of them. So I'll conclude with this one from Kat. How long do you think it might take until you can develop a printed gun which could be considered comparable in quality to a store-bought gun?
Oh man, I don't think I'm going to even be the person to do that. The materials simply are of another quality. The comparability is not even there. I mean, perhaps all you guys have experience with firearms. You're just not going to be able to make a Remington, you know, 380 or 370 or 870. I was going to buy an 870 today. You're just not going to be able to make the same kind of gun in these materials. It isn't realistic. And not that like, oh, you shouldn't dream to, no, it's just ABS can't withstand an impact force of a small, like constrained 50,000 PSI from a rifle cartridge. It just can't do it. It's the same plastic in Legos. And really there's no thickness outside of the absurd or the totally impractical that can withstand this. But that's just if we're comparing apples to apples. I'm saying that you're not going to be able to use your MakerBot to 3D print an AR-15. That's all I'm saying. I know that the SLS technology and other ways of doing 3D printing with inventive and cool materials, especially with some of these advances in nanochemistry and nanoprinting, they're going to make plastics that are roughly equivalent to things that we consider metallic and ceramic. So it's going to be there one day. I just don't think that's our goal, to make something comparable to the quality. You know, our goal is basically to say, can a 3D printer print a gun? Does the gun work? And what does that mean? And maybe this seems so simplistic, but I'm telling you, the actual execution is extremely baroque and very difficult. So I do nothing but like administrative stuff these days, and I'm not having half the fun that it might seem that I'm having like online. Those just serve a propaganda function. I want to thank all of you guys for coming out, and if I didn't get to your questions, I'm sorry, but you're all free to email me. My email is crw@defdist.org. I actually try to respond to all my email, but perhaps that lowers the response time. If you guys want to learn more or want to be part of the
Thank you so much, Cody.
Yeah, of course, of course. Go ahead.
It's always great to know that there are daring individuals out there, such as yourself, who are willing to build technologies like these that will hopefully outpace and circumvent the state. I'd also like to thank all the participants for coming out tonight and listening to our webinars. If you have any more questions for Cody, just feel free to email him at crw@defdist.org. And I hope all of y'all can continue coming back to our webinars to learn more throughout the year. We would just like to inform you that our next webinar is Tuesday, April 16th at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. Students for Liberty Campus Coordinator and Seasteading Institute Representative George McHugh will be discussing the practical implications of seasteads and how they can create real-life examples of innovative rules while remaining within the existing international legal framework. If you want to register for this, just visit our website, studentsforliberty.org. And just one final note, shortly all of y'all will be emailed a follow-up that will give you more detailed information about internships and other opportunities in the movement. You will also receive a survey to evaluate the webinar. Please take a couple of minutes to fill it out. It helps us know what to improve in our programs and how to make these webinars more interesting for you. And with that, we are officially wrapped up for tonight. Thank you again for your time this evening, and have a wonderful night, everyone.